Look at the photograph. At first glance, it seems innocent enough. A group of musicians from the Dodge City Cowboy Band posing with their instruments in 1885. Faces serious as death, like all Victorian portraits. But look closer. Look at the man sitting in the center of the front row, the one with the dark mustache and the steady gaze that seems to follow you. That's Clayton "Clay" Hollister, and the horn he's holding in that picture wasn't just for playing music. It was hollow, specially modified, and he'd used it to smuggle over $20,000 in stolen gold coins out of Dodge City, right under the noses of every lawman in Kansas. The men surrounding him in that photograph, the ones posing as innocent musicians, were some of the most dangerous outlaws the West had ever seen. And this photograph, taken just moments before they disappeared into the frontier forever, captured the greatest con the Wild West had ever witnessed. Kansas in 1885 was supposed to be civilized. The wild days of Dodge City were over. Wyatt Earp had moved on. Bat Masterson was gone. The law had teeth now, and the outlaws who'd once run free were either dead, in prison, or smart enough to have moved on. Clayton Hollister was smart enough. He'd been a cowboy, a rustler, a bank robber, and a killer. By 1884, at age 32, he wanted one more big score, something that would set him up for life, and then he'd disappear into California or Mexico. The problem was that Dodge City was locked down tight. Banks had guards, trains had armed expressmen. Every stranger who rode into town got looked at twice by suspicious lawmen. But Clay noticed something interesting. The town loved its cowboy band, local celebrities who played at town celebrations, dances, and special events. When the cowboy band showed up somewhere, nobody suspected them of anything. They had freedom to move around, access to buildings where strangers would be questioned, and most importantly, nobody looked at them too hard. So Clay decided to become a musician. Look at the photograph again. Count the men. There are at least 15 visible. Clay recruited each of them carefully over 6 months, choosing men who'd ridden with him before, men he could trust. The man to Clay's right in the photograph, holding the trombone, was Tommy Blackwell. Tommy had killed 3 men in a range war in Wyoming and escaped by hiding in a coffin while the law searched around him. To Clay's left sat Marcus Webb, the one with the trumpet. Webb had been a safecracker in Kansas City, and he knew locks better than most locksmiths. He'd studied music as a child, which made him valuable. He could actually play that trumpet well enough that nobody would question whether the band was legitimate. Standing in the back row, partially obscured but visible if you look close, was Samuel "Snake" Garrett. You can just see his face between 2 other men, and even in the photograph, there's something unsettling about his eyes. Snake was a cattle rustler who'd moved over 2,000 head of stolen cattle through 3 territories without ever getting caught. He was a genius at forging documents and making illegal things look legal. The others in the photograph were a mix of real cowboys who genuinely played music and didn't know they were part of a criminal gang, and hardened outlaws who'd learned enough about instruments to fake their way through rehearsals. By mixing legitimate musicians with his gang, Clay had created perfect cover. For 6 months, the cowboy band played at every event they could book. They played at weddings and barn dances. They marched in parades. They performed at the opening of new businesses. Slowly, they became part of the fabric of Dodge City, trusted and familiar. And while they played their horns and fiddles, they were studying the town. Snake Garrett memorized the schedules of every bank guard. Marcus Webb examined every safe and lock they encountered. Tommy Blackwell mapped out escape routes. And Clay studied photography. He'd become fascinated with how photographers set up their equipment, how long the exposure took, how everyone had to hold perfectly still or they'd come out blurred, because Clay had realized something important. when a photographer was setting up for a group portrait, when everyone was focused on staying still and looking at the lens. That was when nobody was paying attention to anything else. That was the perfect moment to rob them blind. The annual Dodge City Fair in September 1885 was the biggest event of the year. Thousands of people attended. Farmers, ranchers, merchants, families from all over Kansas. The Cowboy Band was hired to perform multiple times throughout the 3-day fair. But the fair had something else that interested Clay and his gang: a massive amount of cash. Merchants paid booth fees in gold and silver. Livestock sales were conducted in cash. Entrance fees from thousands of visitors added up fast, and all of that money was stored in a strongbox in the fair organizer's office. On the afternoon of September 19th, 1885, the fair photographer announced he'd be taking a group portrait of the Dodge City Cowboy Band. All the musicians gathered, arranging themselves with their instruments, sitting and standing in carefully staged rows. Look at the photograph again. Look at how still everyone is, how focused on the camera. This exposure probably took 30 to 40 seconds, a long time to hold perfectly still. A long time when nobody is watching anything except the photographer and his camera. That's when Clay and 5 of his men made their move. While the photographer was under his black cloth, while everyone in the photograph held perfectly still, while the entire fair was focused on watching the band pose, Clay had positioned his most trusted men in specific locations around the fairgrounds. They moved like ghosts. Marcus Webb had already picked the lock on the strongbox that morning, weakening it so it would open with minimal force. Snake Garrett had forged a document giving him authority to transport the day's receipts. Tommy Blackwell had horses ready at 3 different locations. The robbery took less than 3 minutes. While the photograph was being taken, while Clay and half the gang stood frozen in front of the camera, providing perfect alibis, the other half emptied the strongbox of over $22,000 in gold and silver coins, loaded it into instrument cases that had been specially modified with false bottoms, and distributed it among the band's equipment. By the time the photographer emerged from his black cloth and declared the picture a success, the robbery was complete. The money was hidden inside the very instruments the band would use for their performance that evening. That photograph you're looking at? That was being taken at the exact moment that over $20,000 was being stolen. Clayton Hollister, sitting there in the front row with his horn and his calm expression, was orchestrating the whole thing while appearing to do nothing more than pose for a picture. That evening, the Dodge City Cowboy Band gave the performance of their lives. They played for the grand dance, and everyone remarked on how energetic they seemed. What nobody knew was that they were playing instruments stuffed with stolen gold, that every note came through metal hollowed out to hide coins. Clay played his horn with gold coins rattling softly inside it with every note. Marcus Webb's trumpet was so full of silver that it changed the instrument's tone, making it slightly flat. Snake Garrett had modified his fiddle case to carry almost $2,000 by itself. They were literally playing music with the evidence of their crime, and nobody suspected a thing. The dance went until midnight. When it ended, the band loaded their equipment into wagons, equipment that now weighed considerably more than it had that morning, and headed back to their lodgings. They told everyone they'd be staying for the final day of the fair. They were gone before sunrise. By the time the theft was discovered on the morning of September 20th, the Dodge City Cowboy Band had scattered in 8 different directions. Clay had planned the escape as carefully as the robbery itself. The gang split up, each man taking a different route, each carrying a portion of the money hidden in various clever ways. Clay himself headed south toward Oklahoma Territory, his hollowed-out horn strapped to his saddle, containing nearly $3,000 in gold coins. Tommy Blackwell went west toward Colorado. Marcus Webb headed east. The real musicians in the band, the innocent ones who'd had no idea they were providing cover for a robbery, woke up to find that half their members had disappeared overnight. They were questioned extensively, but they knew nothing. They'd been used as unwitting accomplices, and their genuine confusion helped convince investigators that the robbery must have been an inside job by fair organizers. The photograph became evidence. Law enforcement studied it, trying to identify which members of the band had been Daesh and which had been imposters. But many of the gang members actually had been working cowboys at some point. Their backgrounds checked out. Snake Garrett's forged documents were so good that investigators initially believed the band had legitimate authorization to transport money. The false bottom instrument cases were never found. The horses used in the escape had been purchased from different sellers using different names, making them impossible to trace. Kansas went wild trying to find the missing musicians. Posses rode out in every direction. Telegraph wires burned up with descriptions. Rewards were offered, $500 per outlaw, dead or alive. The Pinkerton Detective Agency was brought in. The photograph was copied and distributed to lawmen across the West. But Clay and his gang had done something brilliant. They'd given up their instruments. Once the money was removed and hidden in more conventional places, they destroyed or sold the modified horns and trumpets and fiddles. Marcus Webb's trumpet ended up in a pawn shop in Denver. Clay's horn was thrown into a river in Oklahoma Territory. Without the instruments, without any physical evidence connecting them to the robbery, the gang members were just cowboys moving through the territory. They'd changed their appearances, shaved mustaches, grew beards, dyed hair. They used different names. They split up and stayed apart, knowing that together they'd be recognized, but separately they were invisible. Over the next 6 months, several men matching descriptions from the photograph were arrested. None of them was actually part of the gang. The real outlaws had vanished like smoke. Clayton Hollister was never caught. Neither were Tommy Blackwell, Marcus Webb, or Snake Garrett. A few of the gang members were eventually identified and arrested, but they either died in prison claiming innocence or were released for lack of evidence. The bulk of the stolen money was never recovered. The photograph became famous, appearing in newspapers across the country with headlines asking readers to help identify the criminal musicians. It was studied by law enforcement for decades, examined by historians trying to separate the real cowboys from the outlaws. Some claimed that Clay Hollister ended up in California, married a woman from San Francisco, and lived out his days as a respectable music teacher. Others swore they'd seen him in Mexico in the 1890s, older but unmistakable, still carrying a horn that he'd play in cantinas for drinks. Tommy Blackwell supposedly died in a gunfight in Colorado in 1887, though the body was never positively identified. Marcus Webb may have returned to Kansas City and resumed his old trade as a safecracker, this time working for banks to improve their security. Snake Garrett simply vanished. The Dodge City Cowboy Band itself disbanded after the robbery, its reputation ruined. The real musicians who'd unknowingly provided cover for criminals found it impossible to get work. Some of them changed careers entirely. Others moved to different towns and started new bands. Look at the photograph one more time. Look at Clay Hollister sitting there in the center of the front row, that horn in his hands, that calm expression on his face. He's looking directly at the camera, directly at you, across more than a century. And if you look closely enough, you might see something in his eyes, a hint of amusement perhaps, or the knowledge that he's literally sitting on top of a fortune while posing as an innocent musician. The other men in the photograph all have stories too. The man holding the guitar in the back row was probably innocent, a real cowboy who loved music and never knew his bandmates were criminals. The one with the trombone next to Clay, that's Tommy Blackwell. And if you examine his face carefully, you can see the hardness there, the look of a man who's killed before. The photograph captured a moment frozen in time, but it was a lie. Everything about it was a lie. The wholesome cowboy musicians, the innocent community celebration. It was the perfect con, preserved forever in silver and glass. A permanent record of the moment when 15 outlaws pulled off the greatest robbery Kansas had ever seen while literally posing for a picture. The Dodge City Fair robbery changed how law enforcement viewed group crimes. Before this, authorities had focused on obvious criminal gangs. The Cowboy Band robbery proved that criminals could hide in plain sight, could use legitimate organizations as cover, could be part of the community they were robbing. That photograph sits in archives now, studied by historians and true crime enthusiasts, analyzed by people trying to identify every face. It's been reproduced in books and documentaries, used as evidence of how the Wild West really operated. Not just shootouts and train robberies, but sophisticated cons and elaborate schemes. The Dodge City Cowboy Band photo remains a testament to the fact that the most dangerous outlaws weren't always the ones with the fastest draws. Sometimes they were the ones sitting calmly in front of a camera, holding musical instruments filled with stolen gold, smiling for posterity while pulling off the con of the century. Look at that photograph one last time. Look at Clayton Hollister and his gang, frozen forever in that moment when they were simultaneously innocent musicians posing for a keepsake and criminal masterminds in the middle of a robbery. That's the genius of it. The photograph captures both truths at once. The Wild West produced a lot of outlaws, but only one gang was smart enough to rob a fair while having their picture taken, and talented enough to literally play music with the evidence of their crime. That photograph proves it. And Clayton Hollister, sitting right there in the middle, knew it all along.